Hey there, everybody. We just finished our achromatic value mixing scales where we talked about white being 0, our darkest dark being 100, 50, 70, and 30 in between. And then we talked a little bit about how to create a subtle value scale or an ombre. And we are going to shift then into doing some mark making studies and then move on in the next video on to how to make a sphere in space. Okay, so you should still have all your paint mixed up. I'll give you one other video here in a little bit about how to save the paint. And like we said before, if you had a lot of paint in your brush from color to color that you want to scoop it off into your value, and then how we can keep this safe, I'll talk about in another video, but that you might want to squirt it a little bit with water to kind of keep it going. And then I'll go into specifics about how we can keep it all clean and safe here in a little bit. I'll also give you a video on how to wash and care for your brushes. Okay, so now that we have a nice value scale going, we're still going to use these synthetic brushes. If you have some other ones, this might be a fun place to try them out to see what happens with some of these softer snap brushes, some of our bristle brushes, and so forth. Okay, so I have a little bit of paint left in my brush from the last exercise. I'm going to just kind of rinse it off a little bit, and I'm going to start with my 30 on my layered wash. So a wash is where we're going to add quite a bit of water to the paint. So I'm going to dip my brush in the paint. I'm going to grab my 30 and get it kind of runny so it's more like a ink or a watercolor. And I'm going to just start to fill that space. I'm going to use more water. And you can see that the paint gets a little more transparent as you go. We are painting on cardstock, and it is sucking up the paint, but I can talk later about how we can build it if we start with a gesso first, which is like a primer. So I'm going to add a little more paint here, a little more water. And now I'm going to layer it. I'm going to grab my 70 and I'm going to see kind of what happens if I float some of that paint on top of it. I'm just kind of rolling the brush. I'm just trying some different things. I'm going to shift to my 100. And I can kind of layer that on top. I can see what happens if I add a little more water to make it washy. I don't really want to overwork it, but I just want to kind of see how far I can push it and kind of make it have like a flooded effect. So a little more water. Just kind of trying some different things with my brushes. So I started with a 30, I jumped to my 70, I put a little black. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to try and do a little white, and I'm going to use it really thick this time. Kind of float it on top. And I'm trying to practice kind of layering the paint. Maybe I'll try to put a little 50 on top of that. And what's fun here is that you have that thin kind of washy paint underneath and then that thicker paint, which we call impasto, on the top. Add a little water just to kind of see what it can do. And that's it. Just a chance to try different things. If you want to try one of your bristle brushes, if you have one, we can see what it does. I'm going to charge the brush a little and get it wet Grab a little black, kind of run it through some of the other values and see if I can kind of layer them. A little more. There we go. Okay, let's shift to Impasto. That just means really thick paint. So I'm gonna try and use my knife for this one. And since I have the 70 on my knife, I'm gonna grab a big, maybe like a small chocolate chip size worth. And I'm gonna lay it in pretty thick and then drag it where it gets thin. I'm gonna grab some of my 100, also a pretty good chunk. And the trick to making something look impasto is that you actually shift values. So I'm gonna go to my 100. And these are just supposed to be really experimental. Turn it a little. Add a little of the 30. And you really can't do these wrong. They're just a chance for you to practice and play with the paint. And the key is to try to keep those values pretty separate so that there's a complexity to it. So that was all with my knife, but I'm gonna try some with my brush. Dry it off a little. I think I'm gonna try my 30, quite a bit. Lay it on there real thick. I'm gonna switch to my 100. Maybe I'll shift colors, shift values to my 50. Maybe I'll drag a little white over that area there. There, grab some white. So this is really kind of rich, thick kind of paint. Okay, so let's shift to our straight edges and see what we can do. Because I have white on the brush, again, just real experimental, I'm gonna grab a little more. I'm gonna see if I can cut some straight edges and use that cross hatching that we used in the previous studies. So I'm going to switch to a crosshatch, jump to my 70. Jump to my 100. And you can see if you can try to layer your different values with a kind of crosshatch mark. Again, there's really no right or wrong way to do this. It's just a chance to see kind of how the paints can work and how you can build a cool space. One of the tricks, I think, to painting is to not overwork something. The more we fuss it, the more that it starts to get flat and kind of muddy. Okay, so there's some more straight edges. And then this one we're gonna do more like we had done with our ombre scale, where we're gonna try and make it a little more subtle with some cross hatching. So I've got a kind of mix of values on my brush. And you can see that through the cross hatching, all those different values that were in my brush are kind of getting mixed on the surface to a kind of 30, 40 gray. But I can see what happens if maybe I add a little white and can layer into it. And like we saw in that ombre scale, the way that you can make it a real subtle kind of shift by using that kind of hatching quality. And it feels kind of playful and impressionistic as it goes. When we paint a painting all at once, this is called alla prima. In later installments, I can show you how we can do an underpainting, which is called indirect painting. The method we're using now is called direct. I'm going to shift to a little white. Notice that in our last video, I talked a lot about keeping that brush clean in between, but here I'm just kind of working through the palette and using it to help kind of shift through. The kind of mark making. So there's all kinds of different ways. What I recommend is if you feel up for it, do this on lots of different surfaces and try as many different kinds of techniques as you can. And then as we start building into the next exercises, you'll see different ways we can work with it once we build a sphere or a cube and different things. You can see this one as it's drying, like how it is doing some pretty neat kind of things. Okay, I'm gonna save this here. Before I go on to the next exercise, if you're wanting to take a break, here's what we want to do. We want to scoop as much of the paint as we can into each value. And keep them in a kind of close little pile. And that's going to help it stay wet longer. And you can kind of clean up some of that mixing that you did. And our black and our white, since those have gotten kind of contaminated, can now become more like a 10 and a 90, and we can put fresh darks at the bottom and fresh lights up at the top. So I'm going to squish these down. Now I have a little bit of a more complex value scale. Okay. Like I said, I'll do another video where I talk to you about how to wash your brushes, but if you take a break now, this would be where you might take a squirt bottle and do a little bit of water on top, and then seal your lid on here really good. Often stand on it. I kind of make the corners match, and then I'll stand on it to get it to press down onto the surface. Okay, so I'll see you in a little bit. Now that we've done our value scales, our making studies, we'll move into learning how to turn it into a form. Okay, we'll see you soon.